Hi, everyone. Today, what we're going to do is continue to go through the theories of Marx and Engels. We'll begin by recapping briefly what we talked about last class, the Communist Manifesto, and then today we'll turn our attention to three new readings. Although, kind of small selections from larger readings, these three pieces symbolize three additional theories by Marx and Engels. So we do have a lot of information to get through today. So let me get going by, reminding you of what we did last class. Last class, basically, we're looking at the Communist Manifesto in terms of a theory of social change. As I mentioned before, when I took Western Civ class in college, the book Communist Manifesto was assigned to us, and I really didn't get much out of it because I didn't know how to approach it. I didn't know the point of the writing. And so here, the point basically is they're trying to explain how society moves forward, how we move from, one mode of production to another. So specifically, they're looking at how capitalism as the new mode of production in modernity sets up new social struggle. The struggle in capitalism becomes between the owner and the worker. And so in capitalism, this battle between the owner and the worker ultimately will move society forward again. So just as we move from feudalism to capitalism, we'll move from capitalism to a more kind of socialist state. And in this state, because the workers through their organization, are kind of winning battles, we're going to get to these socialist programs, such as Medicare, Social Security, minimum wage, safety work conditions. And so, all these things we don't really think of as kind of socialist programs, but they are socialist in nature because they're created by kind of a government mandate rather than the capitalist doing it themselves. So that's what we're seeing, and definitely, the major shift they talked about to a total kind of socialist economy is not there, but we can see different principles of socialism embedded in our economy and in different places around the world. And again, Marx and Engels would say that the powers that be didn't create the minimum wage to be nice to their workers. The workers won the minimum wage through their organization, through their battles. And so we'll turn our attention today to our first of the three theories. And so here we're looking at the German ideology. And so this image here basically is a reflection of this idea, because no matter kind of, where you are, as a leader, you need to have an ideology, a way of thinking that matches how you organize society. So the way people think has to match the organization of society, the society's mode of production. And so that's what we're looking at here. And so the German ideology we can consider to be a theory of social control. So this is the second time we've seen a theory of social control, if you recall Machiavelli's The Prince. But here, as a theory of social control, it's going to be explained differently. So what they're trying to explain basically is how ruling class members, the capitalist class in capitalism, use ideas as power. And so here, there's different forms of power that exist. You can have kind of physical power over people. You physically punish them to get your way. You can have kind of coercion in the sense that, if they don't do what you want them to do, you can withhold wages. You can withhold things that they need to live. And also you can have power through ideas. Basically, getting people to think in the way you want people to think. And Marx and Engels believed that this way of control by the use of ideas is more effective because, the physical force and through coercion, basically people kind of see you as trying to control them and manipulate them. But the use of ideas to control people, often you don't even see it. You're jumping before you're being asked to jump. And so that's why it's more effective, because people don't even realize that they're being controlled when they're, being socialized in a certain way of thinking a certain ideology that operates to control them and to benefit the upper class. So that's what we're looking at here. And so the ruling class, starting to get into the how they're explaining this, they say the ruling class controls the modes of production of mental life. So in the Communist Manifesto, we talked about the kind of material forces they own. You know, they own the factories, they own the land the factories are on, they own the machinery in the factory. But here we're looking at how they also own kind of the production of mental life. And here we're looking at the schools that are controlled by the elites, the media that is controlled by the elites. And what you do in the schools and through the media is produce a certain way of thinking. You produce a certain ideology that fits your agenda. So the ideology kind of fits and justifies your power by getting people to kind of think in the way you want them to think. So just, example of this, when looking at feudalism, kind of the dominant ideology kind of captured life was about courage. Being a serf, you had to have courage to get by, and life's going to be tough, but you have to get the courage to, have to have the courage to get through it. It's about honor. Feudalism was about, the serf, honoring the Lord. Although you may think you're not getting your fair share, you're supposed to, honor your Lord and honor that contract that you have between the Lord and the serf. And you're supposed to be loyal. You have to be loyal to your Lord, be loyal to the overall kingdom. And so this ideology, this way of thinking, emphasizing courage, loyalty, and honor, is a perfect fit for feudalism. On the other hand, with a new mode of production emerging, the mode of production of capitalism, you need a new ideology to fit it. Because under capitalism, it's not about loyalty. The employer will get rid of you when the bottom line says that they should get rid of you. The employee will change jobs as well when better opportunities, come up for them. So, the ideology of feudalism is a mismatch for the mode of production of capitalism. So you need a new mode of production. You need a new ideology to match the new mode of production. So under capitalism, a new way of thinking emerges. It's about hard work. It's about freedom. It's about independence. And so again, recognizing that this way of thinking would be a mismatch for feudalism. You can't tell a serf that life is about freedom because they don't have freedom. You can't tell a serf that life is about independence because they don't have independence. But in a capitalist society, you can start to, tell people that life is about independence, it's about freedom, it's about hard work. And when people buy into this ideology, they're buying into the system as a whole. In capitalism, you need to, work hard for the system to operate smoothly. And although the hard work you put in, you may not get a lot out of, relatively speaking, but nevertheless, you have to buy into that. It's hard work, and if I work even harder, I can improve my life. It's about freedom. I shouldn't tell my boss, how to run her or his job. I should just kind of, give them the freedom to run their own business. And then independence. I shouldn't organize with other workers. We shouldn't create unions. It's about individuals rather than a collective of individuals. And so again, this ideology really is compatible with the capitalist system. And once people buy into it, they're buying into the system, and they allow the system to basically be self-perpetuating, because people, when they think it's all about hard work, independence, and freedom, they're not going to challenge the system at all. So basically, as I mentioned, that driving force, the why, for Marx and Engels always goes back to the mode of production. So every mode of production requires a matching ideology, an ideology that fits the mode of production and that justifies its existence. Otherwise, there'd be a cultural mismatch. And when people are doing things in one way, but thinking in other ways, then there's a mismatch. That's why you need a compatibility of how we think and how we organize society. So this, some relevance, this goes back to what I briefly touched on in our last class. You can look at this chart here, and the blue line represents union membership rates. And then the dotted green line represents income distribution. And so basically, when you see union membership rates at its highest, what you see are disparities between the wealthy and non-wealthy at their lowest. So in other words, income was being distributed more equally when there were high union membership rates. But what you start to see going on, membership rates declining, and then income distribution in terms of the wealthy getting more of their kind of piece of the pie increasing. And so when union membership goes down, inequality goes up as a result. And so this kind of captures the German ideology, because basically, if we're thinking about, not organizing, you're thinking about, it's just about hard work. If you're thinking about freedom, then you're not thinking about kind of organizing and being in unions, and that can work to the benefit of the capitalist, but it works to the downfall of the worker. So now we'll get into the second theory. And so the second theory, commodity fetishism, we can say is a theory of exploitation. So that's what type of theory we're looking at here. And specifically, what they're trying to explain is the exploitation of both the consumer and the worker in a capitalist system. So again, it always goes back to the mode of production. So capitalism is going to be the focus and that driving force in the framework. So when looking at this, we say that people give supernatural powers to commodities. In other words, people fetishize commodities. And when you fetishize something, when you impose these supernatural powers on them, you no longer see the commodities in terms of their use value and how useful they actually are, how practical they are for you. Rather, you see them in a different light. And, just think about fetishizing, people talk about like a foot fetish. And basically the idea is you don't see a foot as a foot anymore. You see a foot as somewhat magical, as this kind of power over you. And it's the same thing with what we do to commodities. So I have a watch there in the slide. So here the idea is you don't see the watch as simply something that helps you keep track of time. You see the watch in terms of these supernatural fetishized ways. The meanings you impose upon the watch, it becomes very kind of powerful. You see it's very cool, it's very fashionable, and you'll pay hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars for a watch. And in reality, perhaps that's not very practical. You could buy a watch for much cheaper. You could save money and maybe spend it better otherwise. So that's the idea. We don't see things in terms of how practical they are for us, how useful they are for us. Rather, we see things in terms of this kind of magical aura that we impose upon them. And so the symbolism, these kind of magical meanings we place upon commodities both promotes unneeded spending. So here's the exploitation of the consumer. We buy more than we actually need. So, I'm just as guilty, sometimes even more guilty than most people. If you go to my closet, I have more pairs of shoes than I need. It's not practical, buying, 10 pairs of shoes when you only wear 3. But I don't think about it in terms of use value. When I see a shoe, I see the shoe and I think it looks cool. I like it a lot in terms of just how it looks. And so as long as I think about it in terms of the coolness, how I like it in terms of the appearance of it, rather than the practicality of it, then I'll keep on buying things I don't really need. And the same thing with hats. You'll rarely, if ever, see me wearing a hat. But again, I have a closet full of hats. I just buy hats and buy hats, but then I never wear them. Very unpractical, not useful at all. But I don't see commodities in terms of usefulness. I often see them in terms of that kind of aura that I impose upon them. Again, that promotes the unneeded spending, or perhaps spending more money on something that I really need to. And so the other exploitation is when we see things in terms of this aura, we don't think about the work that actually goes on behind it. And this matters because when I buy these shoes, Or when I buy these hats, if I really stopped and thought about the labor process, often you see that the very poor work conditions, very young people making the products, very low wages getting paid to the workers in India, China, or wherever the products are being made. If you think about, all that kind of dirty labor that goes into making the pair of shoes, you'll be less likely to buy those pair of shoes because maybe you feel guilty or just some kind of value stand that you have. But I'm not going to buy those shoes because I don't think that the work that goes on producing the shoes is very fair, is very just. So the symbolism not only kind of promotes spending because we don't think of things in terms of use value, but the symbolism also blinds us to the labor process going on behind it. And then when we don't think about the labor going on behind it, we allow the exploitation of the worker to go on unchecked. So again, the why part always starts with the mode production, specifically here, that capitalist system thrives on exchange value. It's for the system to continue to grow. What you need are people buying things and making money through exchange value. And so if we only thought in terms of use value, then we wouldn't buy things we wouldn't need. And so the system would hurt as a result. And so that's basically the necessity of giving the supernatural powers to commodities. It allows the system to thrive, and it allows kind of the exploitation of the worker, again, to go basically unchecked. And so the last theory we're going to get at today is the machinery and technology piece. So again, just like the Communist Manifesto, machinery and technology, commodity fetishism, and the German ideology, they all come back to us again throughout the semester. So that's why I wanted to take time today to go over each, because they will appear and reappear in later theories throughout the semester. So here we're seeing a theory of what we can call technological change in human experience. So basically, when you have new technology, how that kind of reorganizes how we experience life. And so specifically here, the reshaping of human experience focuses on work. So he's trying to explain it, or they were trying to explain the disconnection between work and human experience under capitalism. So again, capitalism is going to be a driving force here, but also it's kind of seen with the addition of higher forms of technology. So again, in modernity, we start to see these pieces of technology that did not exist, pre-modernity and more what we call traditional societies. And so the technology begins to control the worker. And so this is something we touched on briefly in the Communist Manifesto, and they elaborate on this idea more here. So basically, technology employs the worker because you don't control them anymore. In the past, you had a hammer and a nail. You control the hammer and the nail. It did not control you. And today, you have higher levels of machinery, such as an assembly line, and that assembly line starts to control the individual. And so that's, one thing they're getting at. And the other thing is how time itself begins to control the worker compared to in the past, you controlled your own time. So not only the ability to kind of start and stop the work on your own when you control the technology, but also in capitalism, time is money. So in previous modes of production, that idea didn't exist. In slavery and feudalism, you basically just created enough food, shelter, clothing to get by, seasonally speaking. So you needed to produce enough food, to get through the winter. You needed to produce enough food to get through the seasons. So you were not interested in excess. You were not interested in waste, because if you waste, if you're making more clothing than you need to make, then you're wasting resources that you could better use otherwise. If you're making more food than people are going to eat, then again, all that food goes to waste. And so there's no reason to do that. In capitalism, waste isn't a consideration anymore. Basically you want to produce as much as you can in a small period of time so you can, sell as much as you can. So here, the worker becomes controlled by the technology controls the worker rather than the reverse, but also the worker is controlled by time. You're working longer hours, you're working kind of more days of the week compared to in the other modes of production, where often you'd only work if the sun was out or you only work seasonally. So as a result of this, time and technology controlling the worker compared to the past, the intellectual powers, kind of the closeness you have, cognitively speaking, with your work becomes separated. So just as a quick example, in the past, let's say that you were going to make a desk. So, people would use a desk to make different crafts, to make clothing. But before they could make crafts or clothing on that desk, they needed somebody to make the desk for them. And so you couldn't go to a Lowe's, you couldn't go to a Home Depot. You couldn't order it online. You needed to go out and actually collect the wood for yourself. And, with that wood you've collected, you start to, shape the wood into legs, a desktop, and eventually put all the pieces together. Now, this takes, a lot of time and energy, and you're making all this with your hands. You're in control of the technology that you're using, and you're in control of the time as well. Nobody's kind of telling you when to start, when to stop. Usually won't happen here. Some type of exchange. You make a desk for somebody, and in return, they'll provide you a clothing for your labor. So, you're in more control of the time as long as you get it done in a reasonable matter of time. And you're controlling the technology making the desk. And when you're done with the desk, you feel close to it, because you put in the blood, sweat, and tears to make it. You feel that connection to it. In a capitalist society with the new technology, the desk you don't feel close to anymore. Just imagine you're on assembly line, and all you do is stick a leg into it when it comes by. You stick a leg into it. You stick a leg into it. And maybe you're not even making an entire desk. You just make one piece of the desk that the consumer has to put together themselves. So anyway, you're making all these desks on a daily basis, and you're not putting it together. You're not putting in a lot of time to do it. You don't feel a connection to that desk anymore. So there's a kind of separation between one's connection to the product they're making, to their actual labor and capitalism as a result. And I think about this in relation to making food. If you ever make something from scratch, really kind of create everything on your own, follow the recipe, again, it takes longer than just throwing something in the microwave. But after you make that food, you feel connected to it. But on the other hand, if you just grab something at the store, put it in the microwave, there's no connection to that. And so that's what they're kind of getting at here. Because you lose autonomy, you lose control of time in the technology and capitalism, you lose connections to the work that you're actually doing, the products you make when you're working. So, why is this? Capitalism, we say, kind of minimizes human creativity. It minimizes the overall experience of work in favor of control and profit. So it's not about the worker enjoying their work. It's not about you feeling close to your product. It's about you just working and making the product so it can be sold, so profit can be made. So again, that focus on the new mode of production in modernity capitalism really driving society in terms of changes, reshaping how we feel connected to our labor, reshaping how we approach different commodities, and reshaping overall how we're controlled in terms of how we think the general ideology of a society. So, like I did before with Machiavelli, let me quickly run through some different visuals, and we can, use these different theories to kind of re-see what we're seeing. So here is a GPS device, and we can apply the machinery technology theory to the GPS device, because as long as you start to kind of follow the GPS, you lose kind of the knowledge, that cognitive connection with driving. So, when I was younger, when I first had my license, I had to map it out. I had to get out a map kind of figure it out direction wise. And once I learned that, I would actually know how to get there on my own. But now, if I travel somewhere, I just put the destination in the GPS device, and it does kind of all the work for me. And so I lose kind of that knowledge of how I'm doing it and how to get there. Yeah, if my GPS breaks down, I'd be screwed. I wouldn't know where to go or how to get there. So that's one way we can look at a GPS device in the way kind of Marx and Engels were talking about how higher levels of technology start to minimize the cognitive connections with what we're doing. And also, the GPS device is a part of the capitalist system. It would not exist unless people are buying it. So it's there to first and foremost make money. And so the second, kind of consequence of it, it minimizes that connection we have with human experience. So here we see three different pairs or three different kind of styles of shoes. And we can kind of see these shoes in terms of, how they look, but also we can apply the commodity fetishism theory to this image. So we don't see these shoes in terms of practicality. We don't see these shoes in terms of usefulness, but rather, how stylish they look, how cool they look. Having these, 4-6 inch heels are not very practical, in terms of getting around from place to place on a daily basis. But as long as you don't think about the practicality, of these shoes, you'll be more likely to buy them, more likely to spend a lot of money on them. Although if you do wear them, perhaps you only wear it once or twice. So again, we can start to see these shoes, not only in terms of what they are, but we can re-see these shoes in terms of the lens provided to us by Marx and Engels. We fetishize such things and we'll be more likely to buy them when we really don't need them. So just a few more images here. Here, what we see, two different pictures. One of a bunch of managers, maybe owners of Whirlpool, and then another one of a car factory, automobile factory, and the workers leaving. So we can again see these at face value. A bunch of guys who are running the show and a bunch of people doing the actual work. But also you can re-see these images through the Communist Manifesto. The new mode of production, capitalism, creates the owners, creates the workers, and the struggle between the two groups. Here we see some leaders, both kind of politically speaking, but also in terms of the business world. And you have, politically speaking, people from different parties. And so the idea is, you don't have too many people calling for drastic change. Republicans, Democrats may have their differences in policy, but nobody's really calling for a change of the system as a whole. Little tweaks here and there, but you don't have, many politicians coming in saying we need to change the system as a whole and move into a new one. And the same thing with, people in the business world. You may have a lot of people who are very generous, with their money, such as Bill Gates. But again, he's not calling for an entire new system. So here we can see this through the German ideology. No matter kind of where you're coming from, when you're part of that ruling class, you still promote an ideology that perpetuates the system as a whole. And here's an advertisement from Gap. It could be Gap Kids. But nevertheless, I can apply this to the commodity fetishism again, as long as we focus on the cuteness, of the outfits, as long as we focus on kind of how nice the kids look when they're wearing the Gap clothing, we'll be more likely to buy the clothing, although maybe you're spending more money on it than you need to. And you'll be more likely to buy the clothing when you don't think about the work that goes on behind it. So perhaps the clothing you buy at the Gap is made in China, India, and kids of a similar age group are actually making these products. So as long as you don't think about who's actually making the products, you'll be more likely to buy it. But if you start to think about these unfair, unsafe labor conditions in such countries as India and China, then you'll be more likely to not buy it because you feel a little bit guilty or again, it's on your personal values. I don't want to support such a system. So to conclude, here we have a painting by MMA, and here, we can interpret this in terms of the Communist Manifesto again. So, you got to look closely at it. But in the background, you see a factory setting, a lot of smoke and kind of dirt going on where the work is actually being done, and kind of symbolically separating the kind of work is a fence. So kind of on the other side of the fence, you have a life of leisure, a parent or perhaps some type of guardian and a child next to her. And they're kind of living a very life of leisure. Their outfits are very clean, where we would imagine behind the fence, there's a lot of dirtiness going on in terms of one's clothing. And again, you can see this in terms of the workers and the owners, those who get the kind of larger pieces of the pie, and those who are kind of getting, relatively speaking, little in return for their labor. And so again, a painting is painting, but you can see it differently when you apply a different theoretical lens to it. So I'll leave that there for today. I know we had a lot of information to get through, but we need to get through this information because it will come back throughout the semester, and we will see it come back in our next reading. The next reading is going to be a legacy piece where people living and writing today are going to be updating ideas of Marx and Engels. So I'll leave that there, and please, as always, if you have any questions, just let me know.